Welcome to my mine. We are mining diamonds. We are not a straight mine. We don't have to fly mobs. Welcome to my mine. Play that note block nicely. Show me all those.
We all know that prisons are one scary place, mainly because of who's in them. We all see bad criminals in newspapers from time to time, but these are the scariest and most dangerous prison inmates you don't even know about.
Ah, sweet, I was curious if the title was just a clickbait scheme, but nope. You, or whoever wrote this script for this video, actually intended this to be the title of the video. That's gonna be very embarrassing.
Coming in at number 10, we have The Real Pennywise. We all know the hit book, miniseries, and now movie It. It is about a clown that goes around scaring kids and taking their lives. This is good for a fright, but it's all fiction, right? Well, not exactly, because back in the 1980s, which is when the It movie was set, there was a real-life version of Pennywise.
What? John Wayne Gacy was a 70s serial killer. The last of his victims were killed in 1978. The man was imprisoned in December of that year. Hell, the trial began in February of 1980 and was originally set to be executed of June of the same year.
The guy was called John Wayne Gacy, and he was, on the surface, a normal husband and father. But he had a crazy secret life. He began to dress up as a character he called Pogo the Clown. Pogo was supposed to be like Bozo, but as I said, this guy's more like Pennywise. That is because he would volunteer at children's parties. During this time, he would take as many kids as possible and then take their lives.
The wording here is super weird. I hope to God you're not suggesting that Gacy's clown persona was his method of gathering victims. I mean, sure, Gacy had a thing for clowns, but that wasn't really a factor in his killings. In fact, most of his victims in this time period were people he hired to work for his construction business, since most of his employees were teenagers or young adults. He was scouting for victims through his own fucking company.
They found missing people in his crawl space inside his house and in a nearby river. He's gone down as one of the most scary and most dangerous criminals to ever exist. Luckily, he's locked up behind bars today, but this still doesn't change how terrifying he really is. I'm pretty sure this guy's put a lot of people off clowns forever.
Locked behind bars to this day, huh? Well, that's good to hear. We wouldn't want someone like that running around. Are we talking about the same John Wayne Gacy, though? The same man who was executed for his crimes in 1994? That same John Wayne Gacy? Was it really difficult for you to proofread or fact-check something like this before you turn it into an awful YouTube video? I understand how hard the pressure can be as a presenter. It can be a little hard. We slip up now and then when it comes to research and studying, but it is kind of your job as a presenter to, you know, attempt to present accurate information. That's why we have fact-checking. It's made worse here considering that John Wayne Gacy is a very well-known serial killer. He's one of the most famous serial killers on your list, meaning that tons of people will likely know what you said is inaccurate, including myself. So starting off your list like this is just a recipe for disaster. Oh, and there was actually something I caught after scripting this part originally. Since I'm taking a literal approach to the video and its title and I can't help but be a dick about everything, well yes, John Wayne Gacy was pretty bad and a dangerous serial killer, but most dangerous prison inmates. Before he became a serial killer back in 1968, Gacy was sent to prison for 10 years after being charged for sodomy after sexually assaulting a 15-year-old boy. During this time when he was in prison, he was considered a model prisoner. He was the head cook. He set out to improve the living conditions of his fellow inmates and even got the prison to install a mini golf course. There were a lot of other things to this list, including pay rates for people in the mess hall, but you get the idea. This was a common practice of his, trying to build the best public image of himself possible in and out of prison. And after he was in prison for all of his murders, the man spent his time fucking painting. The man who was trying to make prison for everyone a whole hell of a lot more easier and who painted pictures of clowns was one of the most dangerous prison inmates in the world.
Next up is Lobster Boy. This criminal is very odd and has lived one of the most odd lives ever lived.
This criminal is odd and lived one of the most odd lives ever lived. Criminal odd lived most odd lives lived. You couldn't be fucked to find a better way to make that not sound like a second-grade book report.
His real name is Grady Franklin Stiles Jr. He was nicknamed Lobster Boy thanks to a condition that's common in his family. He went into the carnival at the age of 7 as there weren't many things he could do thanks to his hands. He later got married to another carnival performer, but as he aged, he became angry and drank way too much, which caused him to turn evil. He was horrible to his wife and 4 kids, 2 of which had hands like he did. When one of his kids without the odd hand grew up and got married, he became jealous and shot her husband in the face.
It was actually her fiance. He was killed the night before their wedding. Also, the report said that Jacqueline was shot once in the chest, not the face, but yeah. Please proceed.
He went to prison but was released years later.
No. Grady never went to prison. He was sentenced to 15 years of probation. In fact, it was due to his deformities and poor health because of his alcoholism that Pennsylvania State felt that their prisons were not able to meet his needs. So, 2 entries in, and not only are both of them littered with factual inaccuracies, but one of them doesn't even fit the criteria. It says he was never a prison inmate. What the fuck?
Next up is Eyeball Man. This is not only one of the scariest and most dangerous criminals, but he's also one of the scariest looking men on this planet. In 2012, he was arrested for shooting a cop in a bathroom argument. Now that's bad enough, but that isn't what brought him media attention. What brought him all this attention was the scary tattoos he had all over his face. He's obsessed with tattoos and has over 20 just on his face. But his face isn't the only place he has tattoos. He also has a tattooed black eyeball, which is why many people call him Eyeball Man. His real name is Jason Barnum, and he is one scary looking guy. From his Facebook photos, we can also see this guy has tattoos all over his entire body. Not only that, he's got a giant skull tattoo on the top of his head, so maybe he should be called Skull Man instead.
Why is he on this list? I mean, seriously, he was a heroin addict who robbed and burglarized so that he could keep buying heroin and shot a police officer that was investigating the robberies and then was arrested for attempted murder. He didn't actually kill him, it was only an attempted murder. And aside from that, all that was mentioned were his tattoos. Sure, he's dangerous, but I now start to question the validity of this list just being the most dangerous prison inmates and not just some kind of weird criminals list in disguise.
This guy looks so scary, even if he hadn't committed a crime, I think he'd still make this list. I know you shouldn't normally judge a book by its cover, but perhaps this guy is an exception.
Uh-huh.
Just want you to know who I am.
Coming up next is the Red Ripper. This guy's nickname is the Red Ripper.
Yeah, you don't fucking say!
It's a parody of Jack the Ripper, who took the lives of hundreds of women in England many years ago.
5 women. 5 confirmed women. Jack the Ripper was mostly famous because nobody ever caught him. 5.
5! Yeah, you heard me right, motherfucker. 5!
10 million points for Griffin Puff!
Next up is Underwear Strangler. Yeah, as you can tell by this guy's name, he is seriously strange. This guy's real name is Johann Unkenwagen, but he went as Jack. He's Austrian, and ever since his youth, he was in and out of jail for petty theft and things like that.
Something tells me that you or whoever wrote your script only skimmed a Wikipedia article for this information and just made it seem like he went to prison for just very petty crimes. Yes, he was in prison for some petty crimes, but out of the 16 of his convictions, most of them involved sexual assault, since he had a nasty habit of assaulting women, especially prostitutes. Wording is everything, especially when you somehow overlook and underplay the most key behavior he exhibited that led him to becoming a serial killer.
But in 1974, he changed for the worse. He strangled a woman with her own bra until she passed. He then did this to around 40 more women and then moved to LA where he did it some more. He got caught but was somehow freed from prison, but then later went on to do it 4 more times. Finally, the LAPD stopped him and he was given a life sentence.
And it didn't take much longer for you to make another factual inaccuracy. In fact, you completely fucked up almost everything about the entire story. Everything! Yes, he killed a woman by strangling her with her own bra. That was kind of his signature. But then you completely fuck up the sequence of events after this. The closed caption state you say he killed 40 more women before heading to LA. Now, if this is what you said, then that'd be heavily incorrect and I wouldn't know where the fuck you got this information from. But let's just give you the benefit of the doubt and assume you said 14 instead, because that's a little closer to the actual body count. For starters, it is true that Jack was freed from prison after the murder conviction, but he was arrested after just killing 1 woman and was sentenced to life in prison. A petition to pardon the sentence was set up by a lot of Unterweger's advocates and was sent to the president of Austria for review. However, the president refused due to his life sentence, stating that Unterweger would need to serve a minimum of 15 years before the possibility would even be presented. After 15 years, the petition was accepted and Jack was released. It was after his release release that he continued killing women, 1 in Czechoslovakia and 7 more in Austria, bringing our kill count to 9. It wasn't until he went to LA that he killed 3 more women, bringing our count to 12. And it wasn't even the LAPD that caught him. US Marshals caught him in Miami.
But the creepy thing about this guy is he was writing for magazines during all this, and people didn't even know it was him writing. Imagine your favorite columnist doing something like this. I don't know about you, but that would really freak me out.
What? That makes no sense! Jack was writing poems and stories in prison under his own name! He wrote an autobiography! It was a bestseller! It was because of his writing that intellectuals and literary figureheads of Austria petitioned for him to be released in the first place. And it wasn't until his release that he became a celebrity and started writing for magazines.
And even after he went to jail, he was still writing in his cell. He was in prison for around 4 years, but then chose to take his own life by a similar method he used on other people. I guess that's karma for you.
This makes even less sense. As we established, Jack went to prison after the first murder, and then it was after his release when he started killing more women. So the second arrest occurred on February 27th, 1992. He was handed over to Austria 3 months later, and was sentenced to life in prison just a month later in June of that year. That same night, he hung himself. That was 4 months, as opposed to the 4 years Charlie proposed here. 4 months. 4 years. I don't even know what caused this error to even occur. So, some of the other entries were really flawed and inaccurate, or just had a few minor issues with them. But damn near everything was wrong here. The timeline was completely messed up, the nature of the case was incorrect, you fucked up who arrested him, fucked up how long he was in prison for and when he killed himself, and somehow believed no one knew who he was as an author when that celebrity status was what impacted his release from prison and was the main reason he went to LA to begin with.
Next up is Human Plague. This is a nickname nobody wants to have, unless perhaps you're Mary Malone. This woman holds the all-time record for taking the most lives accidentally.
Only 3 people were confirmed kills of hers. Some people believe it was up to 50 people that died, but none of it was outright confirmed due to the fact that Mary was using a lot of pseudonyms whenever she moved to different cities, and her unwillingness to cooperate with pretty much everybody. She not only didn't believe anyone when she was told she had typhoid, but also completely withheld information about her past, so it's a possibility, but based on what we're able to confirm about Mary, this just isn't the case.
She was a cook in New York to wealthy families and in some offices too, but everywhere she went, a terrible scenario seemed to play out. Within 2 weeks of any place she became a cook at, all of the residents or workers developed serious conditions. And as healthcare back then wasn't so great, a huge amount of people ended up passing away.
Huge, you say?
She was investigated by the police many times as they spotted a very obvious pattern of this happening over 20 times.
One investigation by a sanitation engineer. After she refused to cooperate with him, he compiled Mary's work history, which at this point only consisted of 8 families she worked for, discovered the consistent pattern, leading police to detain Mary, which led to her first quarantine. After her release, she tried to do other work, but eventually returned to do cooking quite a few more times after, which started another major typhoid outbreak in 1915, which led to her second and final quarantine. So maybe 2 major investigations happened, both times were carried out by health investigators of some kind. It was not primarily done by the NYPD.
But Mary denied doing anything to the food and said it was all one big coincidence. Well, it turned out Mary herself was very ill. She knew this and caused all the food to become bad and give others illnesses. She claimed she had no idea about it. She was treated and then lived freely outside of jail. And the police actually acted like she was a victim because she was sick.
Okay, well, for one thing, Mary was adamant that she never could be linked to any of these outbreaks and believed that she had no diseases at all. Around this time, germ theory was not really a widely accepted concept, so many people were skeptical of the idea. She also was outwardly healthy and didn't seem to be a danger to anyone. Hell, she even tried to take care of the sick families that she unknowingly infected, but also didn't know she was just making it much worse. Secondly, I don't recall police ever treating her like a victim. Before her first quarantine, she was tested as a positive carrier. During that quarantine, science were mostly critical of the quarantine as they believed it wasn't required. She could just abstain from being a cook for the rest of her life and be properly trained in ways not to spread her disease rather than just be sheltered on an island for a long ass time. And by the time of her second second quarantine, after a large outbreak caused by her, people already knew of the first incidents and did not feel sorry for her at all. She continued to work as a cook after agreeing that she wouldn't, which is how she got out of her first quarantine. So no one was really giving her any sympathy at this point. And finally, this makes the second person on this list who wasn't even a prison inmate. Both quarantines had her sent to a clinic on the North Brother Island in New York City, where she basically lives secluded from other people. So, awesome, we're breaking the criteria yet again.
But in a diary entry found decades later, she revealed she knew about her condition the entire time. Watch out for your lunch, ladies, kids.
Now, that's just not true, or at least every source and article I could possibly find never even referenced a journal or a diary being discovered after Mary's death, or her admission of knowing about her condition from the start. So this is either just a complete lie or you found a completely false source that not even I could find. And considering how so far more than half of this video has been extremely misinformed, I'd really want to believe you just didn't know that your information was inaccurate, which still doesn't excuse you releasing this video, since you've still made a terribly uninformed video where so far only 3 entries were mostly accurate outside of that stupid Jack Ripper comment.
10 billion points for Griffin Puff!
Next up is Hands On. This man is famous as he took over 5,000 lives just by using his hands, hence the nickname Hands On. His real name was Saul Fiklar, and he was around during the Ottoman Empire. He took an average of 4 lives per day for 5 years. But how did he do it with his bare hands? Well, it was all by strangling. Believe it or not, he did this to every person, and it worked every time. He was either very strong or very skilled, but he's definitely a madman. This one is pretty historic, going all the way back to the Ottoman Empire, but there were terrible people back then too, I guess. He had no motive, or at least no known motive, and historians say he would make an amazing athlete today. But to top it all off, he actually worked for the ruler of the Ottoman Empire at the time and was their royal gardener. But he never went after the ruler or anyone of much importance. Maybe that's one tangle he knew he wouldn't have won.
So a bit of a mild nitpick, but just indulge me for a sec. In a book discussing the history of the Ottoman Turks, Zulfikar apparently confessed to killing only 4,000 people instead of 5,000, but this seems to be more of a problem with individual sources claiming different body counts. Also, there was a special tradition set up for Zulfikar whenever he was told to kill a high-ranking official, which involved a race in the garden, but that's not too important. As for the rest of what else was presented, it's not really something I can argue with, since it does present accurate information to Ottoman garden executioners and how they were selected with their physiques and all that. But I do have one question. Why is he on the list? He was the chief garden executioner of Constantinople, a man who killed other people for the Sultan, a man who was never a prison inmate. Which now leads me to my final thoughts. What a terrible fucking experience. I've watched this video over 6 times, and after a lot of research, I continue to find more inconsistencies and outright misinformation on each viewing. And it's very possible that I missed some other details as well. Only 4 of the entries on this list were fine, considering they were very notorious and scary serial killers, with most of the information being presented just being decent, minus my little nitpick about Jack the Ripper. 3 of the entries on this list never even went to prison. 1 entry was just commenting on some dude's tattoos. 2 entries had completely fucked up the entire history of the subjects at hand, and most of the entries had numerous inaccuracies following them. This was just horseshit, and it completely pissed me off during the scripting process. My advice, actually give a shit about the content that you put out. Look it over and just get someone else to do it for you, for fuck's sake. People aren't stupid and they're gonna pick up on this shit. Just look at the like to dislike ratio. That should speak volumes about audiences and how much they feel like someone should put care into their own videos.